This is season 2 of 15 with Fosca, the podcast that brings you authentic voices from Italy in real time. Become a part of our community by subscribing and stay right where you are to hear inspiring personal stories from Italians and expats alike, conversations about the current scenario, and to unpack together the intricacies of Italy and Italian society and culture today. Buongiorno mondo, and welcome back to 15 with Fosca, the podcast. I could not be happier to be sitting here today with a friend and a collaborator, Devorah Block. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that we're here chatting. We have kind of an interesting story, you and I, so I want to talk about that just quickly as an introduction. You and I have sort of been like two ships passing in the night for the past, I don't know, like 20 years. We had seen each other's name. We had kind of known each other in some remote way. And then you put an ad on a group, Facebook group site for an office space. And I had just quit my job at Stanford and I was just starting out, but I was like, this sounds like a perfect fit. So you and I started chatting. We started texting. I came to see this space. I fell in love with it.
Because it's amazing.
It's a beautiful space.
It's an amazing space.
It's such an amazing space. And we'll talk about Palazzo Frescobaldi and we'll talk about what you're doing there at the office and at the Salon of Urban Architecture. But it was kind of like all of a sudden this little excuse to go see this beautiful office space actually gave birth to what's become a friendship.
Absolutely.
And a collaboration.
Yeah.
So I'm super excited to have you here today because of that. Because I really do feel that like it was destiny for us to meet.
Yes.
And we found each other and now we have sort of become a part of each other's lives.
Absolutely.
So I want to start with, I just called you an international woman of mystery, which I love. And I think you kind of are. So I want to talk first about your journey. So you have a very interesting background. So how the heck did you get here to Florence?
Yes. Mystery, I don't know. It feels like that oversells it a bit. So I have dual citizenship, and that's also a bit of a story. So I'm American born and bred. My family's all American. But when I was 14 years old, my father got a job in New Zealand and moved the family out there. So I ended up doing all of my high school and the first years of my university in New Zealand, in Auckland. And then went to Australia for a couple of years, went back to the States. I was in New York for a few years working in museums. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Where did you work in New York?
Mostly the Brooklyn Museum of Art.
Nice.
That was my number one.
Oh, fun.
And then I was at a tiny little museum called the Dahesh Museum for about a year.
Okay.
And then I did freelancing work at MoMA, which was a lot of fun.
Nice.
Yeah, it was very cool. And then, I was in New York. For anyone who was sort of around New York at that time, I was there sort of 2000, 2003. And there was obviously 9/11. There were a lot of economic problems and a lot of cuts to the cultural budget. And in my personal life, what that meant is I ended up one summer with 6 weeks of time off work and decided to come to Italy and met my husband. So
was it your first time in Italy?
It was not my first time.
Okay.
I actually, even though my entire family is American, I have an Italian uncle who has now moved back to Seattle, but he was living in Verona for 30 years.
How
so my dad's
interesting.
younger brother was in the wine business. Yeah. So he'd brought me out here when I was like 14 to visit once. And then probably because of him, I did Italian at university.
Obviously.
And so it wasn't the first time, but it was the first long time that I'd come out here. It was supposed to be, I think, for 2 weeks. It ended up being maybe 4. And then, went back to New York, gave notice, and moved to Florence.
Yeah, I did something similar.
Really?
Yeah, I did.
We get caught by this bug. Something happens.
I know. So, now that we're sort of 20 years on, Can you, sorry, I'm sorry, yeah. But like what, I mean, obviously, yes, you fell in love and that's, that happened to me as well. But why did you decide to stay here with all the options you have? With your, with your dual citizenship, your experiences all over the world at this point. You've lived in Australia, you've lived in New Zealand, you've lived in the US. Why did you stay here?
I mean, Italy has something special about it. Of course, there's the the logical sort of logistical reasons of a husband and now 2 fabulous kids. Yay! And, all of that. But there's a quality of life, but also quality to the life here, I think, which is probably impossible to replicate anywhere else.
Wow, I agree 100%. I think you've said it in a way that nobody has said it before on the podcast. No, and it's true. It's also hard to explain because it is this sort of like invisible or magical component that even if you have, even if everything's going terribly, there's something that always ends up kind of saving the situation. You know what I mean?
I will be completely frank. There have been many moments over the last 20 years in which I have raged against Italy.
I know. I feel you.
But at the end of the day, I think both for myself and for my kids especially, there's so many things that I feel like I can't give them here. Mm-hmm. But there's so much that I can. Yeah. The last few years I've been working a lot in the UK, mm-hmm. and that's been an incredible opportunity for me, and has sort of, I think, filled out some gaps that I felt I had in my life here. Yeah. But it has also at the same time really reinforced that sense that there is a quality of life here that just doesn't have. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine taking my kids away from this.
Yeah, and I wouldn't. I'm very happy that I'm raising my daughter here.
Isn't it interesting? Yeah, I don't think it's easy.
No, it isn't. And
raising a child in a different culture is.
It's so hard, and I've actually, something we talk about a lot in the family, if you will, and being far away, doing it on your own. At least the way I did it, it was just super hard. But then again, it's the only thing I know. Yeah. I've never raised a child in another country.
Right, exactly.
So I've only raised her here. And honestly, I've been very grateful for most of the things that have happened. The way, she's being educated, also just what sort of the kind of lifestyle, if you will, that we're experiencing. Yeah. I want to go back to you were talking about London. Yeah. I want you to talk a little bit. You have such a fascinating and diversified background. You did when you came to Italy, you then you got your master's. You got a PhD as well. Yeah. I want to talk about the work you're doing now and how those experiences were studying here in Italy, getting your advanced degrees here, how those experiences were. And a little bit about what you do in London and just sort of what you're doing right now.
I love it that you say fascinating as opposed to confusing, which is what I sort of think.
No, it is fascinating to me because I think it's hard for people like us who have a lot of interests and also a lot of talents, let's be honest, because it's true. You have to praise yourself and
yes, ma'am.
We have to lift each other up. And, for people who have a lot of capabilities, I think sometimes you can get, people can lose a sense of, how much you are able to do and you're doing. So I want you to tell me a little bit about that. It's not confusing to me. For me, it's fascinating, the work you're doing. No, seriously. So talk about that and talk about a little bit about your studies in Italy.
So I guess I'll start with the studies maybe and get that out of the way.
Let's get it out of the way.
So the first degree that I got here in Italy was I got my master's in Florentine Renaissance, and that was actually through Syracuse University.
Okay, so
it was an American program, but based here in Florence, mm-hmm. and I, of course, applied to it just because it made it seem as though I had not made a rash decision in moving to Italy.
There was actually a reason.
Exactly.
Right?
It wasn't.
I'm going to get my master's in Renaissance art history.
Exactly. I was getting a master's degree. It was all very sensible.
Right.
But it was amazing. I mean, it was it's a fabulous program. It was really well structured. And I got an enormous amount out of it as a sort of student and academic, and also in terms of sort of grounding me and giving me my own space in Italy as well, because I was here for about a year before the course started, and during that year I was very much like just a girlfriend, if that, you know, like I didn't have my own space, and so that was really important for me. The Syracuse also became really important. It was a real home for me, and I think that that's something that, especially coming to Florence, I don't know about in other cities in Italy, but there is this incredibly embracing community here. I think of people who are living
absolutely,
and so Syracuse for me was an enormous. It was a family.
Yeah,
it was an
and I think that's
family.
when I first started like seeing your name or something. I think
Would have
that's
definitely
when
been.
you and I were in contact, sort of, when you were probably in those early years.
Exactly. I was running I started a gallery there, the Syracuse University.
I don't know.
Gallery.
I just remember seeing your name on emails and stuff, and then
trying to get you to come to my openings.
Right, and I never came. I was busy. I would come now. I come to the Salon of Urban Architecture,
and we'll talk about
I'm like
that.
your biggest fan. We'll talk about
you
that.
Are.
So you get your MA in Renaissance Art in Syracuse. You're feeling like legit because you're like,
Finally.
look, I've got a piece of paper. I'm in, the Renaissance like center of the world. And then what happens?
I got a job at Palazzo Strozzi.
Brava.
Yeah, I was really, again, it's being in the right place at the right time. I was the director of Syracuse at the time, Barbara Deinling.
I remember her well.
Very good friends. She was amazing. She's a doctor now.
Like a medical doctor.
Like a medical doctor. She runs a department.
She was awesome. I remember her very well. She had a long tenure. Yeah, she was a real volcano.
I just edited. We can edit this out. But I just
don't edit anything out on the podcast.
I just edited a fascinating article for her that she wrote.
Oh, good.
That's combining her Renaissance background and her medical training now.
Oh, wonderful!
It's really, really.
Oh, cool. Maybe we can put a link to it in the bio. Yeah, if
my goodness.
By the time with this airs, hopefully it'll be published.
Very, very cool.
Okay. So
anyway, she was very close friends with James Bradburn, who had just arrived.
Wonderful. I love James.
He's has a very special place in my life.
Yeah. He's a visionary.
He's an incredible. He's also though. So I was introduced to him and got an internship and then ended up staying there for, I don't know, about 10 years. 8 years. But the team that I worked with under him were still quite close. And we always say that he ruined us for any other place.
I can see that.
He gave us such high expectations of what a workplace would be like. Inspiring, exciting, purpose-driven. And an amazing team. He's a very, very special human
Agree,
being.
100%.
Yeah.
And he's, just for anyone who's curious, he's James Bradburn is his name. He was the director of Palazzo Strozzi for quite some time. He's currently the director of the Brera.
He was until very recently because the mandate ended. So he was part of the original batch of new directors for the Autonomous Museum project. And so he was in the first one, he was renewed for the second term, but you can't do more than 2 terms. So he finished in October.
Oh, no. Okay, well, I'm sure he'll do, I'm not worried. I'm sure he'll do something great.
He's got some pretty cool stuff coming up.
Yay! I'm so excited. But he's just a real visionary. So I think being able to, I had gotten to know him over the years when he was the director of Palazzo Strozzi, and then when we would go to Milan with the students, often he would treat us to these incredible sort of introductions to the Brera, and he's just like, I don't know, just one of those people who's just like amazing. So continue. So you have this amazing experience at Palazzo Strozzi, great team, great director, and then?
James's fault again, actually. He introduced me to Omar Calabrese, who was an incredible semiotician at the University of Siena. He was doing a PhD program, running a PhD program in visual culture. And James, I'm convinced James somehow convinced him to make a space for me in the program. And I say that because, I mean, I did have to go, and that was an interesting experience. I went through the whole sort of standard, having gotten into, undergraduate in New Zealand, and then applying to graduate school in the States for my master's. And then I did the Italian process for my PhD. And I don't know how it compares to any other country, but there was some exams and some interviews. And I think there was a point system based on your experience as well, because it's Italy. There has to be a point system somewhere. And a graduatoria, exactly. And so I got into this program, and my PhD. But I was a weird outlier in the program. So the content was very much focused on visual culture, semiotics. It looked a lot at film and the semiotics of film and contemporary culture. And I was doing a PhD on learning in museums. So I was this sort of strange, but
it is. I mean, it's related. I mean, it was
vaguely related. And Omar Calabrese was very interested, and he was a wonderful.
He's famous. He's a famous film critic. Am I right? I've seen his name, or he's written books on film. I know the name. I'm pretty sure.
He's definitely extremely well known. I'm not sure if he's.
Maybe he's just.
I should know him better. I should know better. But he was very. I know that he was a close colleague of Umberto Eco's for a long time.
Right.
And he did some very important work around semiotics and all.
And where was the PhD program? It was at
Siena.
In Siena, at the University of Siena, in Italian.
It was an international program in all languages. So they would have visiting professors, and they would speak in whatever their language was. So we had stuff in English, we had stuff in Italian, but we also had stuff in French and German. Neither of which I speak.
Right, but somehow, it all works out.
It's osmosis or something. So that was that was a very interesting. I was able to write my PhD though in English. Exactly.
Thank goodness.
That was
because
necessary.
Okay.
Otherwise, I just would have gotten it translated by someone. So that was my PhD. It actually, my degree is from the Scuola Normale.
Oh, which is
Superiore.
Super prestigious.
But the studies were done through
University of Siena.
Yeah.
And that brings us to where you are now. And you really are an international woman of history. Because you're like, and you're very casual about it. Well, I went to college in New Zealand, and master's in the States, and then this and that.
It feels like it just happens, though. I think sometimes.
I know. I think life just sort of.
Just happens. Exactly.
It happens. And where has all of this brought you, right now?
So now I'm obviously living in Florence with my two kids. This is my base, but working a lot in London, and have also sort of moved from. Sort of my entire history up until now has been museums and education. And so museum education, informal education. And in the last few years, the context of that shifted from museums to the built environment.
Which I love. I love the stuff you're working on.
I'm very excited about it as well.
Yay! So tell me about this work you're doing in London. Tell me about the work you're doing also here in Florence.
So I've been very lucky. I actually, you were saying we met through this ad on the Facebook.
We did.
But I also met Karen through the same ad. So
funny. And that's how I met Karen, of course.
Exactly.
Through the ad.
So Karen Templin and I met because Karen found this amazing office space.
Yeah,
so she was the one who first found it.
Okay.
And initially, she just put out, as you saw as well, this sort of message saying, is anybody else looking for a space to share?
Right.
And I was absolutely looking for a space to share. I had been working between like co-work spaces and out of my car.
Me too. It's hard. It's
and
so hard.
it was time for something a little bit more grown up. And it was three of us at the beginning, myself, Karen, and another woman who you should absolutely get onto your program. Noga Arika, who is another amazing sort of powerhouse of a person.
Okay.
And all doing our own thing. I mean, the only thing that we had in common was that we all needed a space. Yeah. We were all mothers, it turned out. But then slowly the areas of similarity started to come out. So I had just started doing a project around a consultancy for an organization called the Built Environment Trust in London. Mm-hmm. And I had been called in because they were exploring the possibility of creating a museum. And so I made sense in that way, even though I didn't have a background in the built environment. And it's like the beginning of the end.
Right.
So I came in to consult with them about that. We ended up making different decisions for the organization about what made the most sense for it strategically, what direction to go in. But my eyes were open to this world of the built environment that I just never I'd never interacted with. But I say that, and obviously we are in our built environment at every moment. Exactly.
But you had begun this sort of, I don't know, more, that there was awareness, and your approach was, in other words, you weren't just walking through streets or inhabiting spaces, you were actually thinking about what that meant, what those spaces communicate,
Brilliant.
What they mean, how we need to change them, how they, affect community, education,
Absolutely.
children, all of us.
Absolutely. That's you should be running this. No, but you should. I mean, like, that's exactly what it is.
I wanted to be in your office.
Yeah,
I still do.
there may be room.
All right.
We might have a desk opening up soon.
Yeah. Well, I come anyway. I'm like, oh, here I am. I pretend. I'm like, it's my house. I was at, the salon, the last salon. I'm like, anyone need a drink?
Right. Exactly. You were perfect.
Thank you once again for tuning in to this week's episode of 15 with Fosca and for continuing to do so. Grazie mille e alla prossima volta.